you teach film, you make film, television as well, podcasts, the Long Rewind, the narrative podcast series Short of Breath. You gave a
Hmm.
TED talk in 2013. Where does this passion come from? Where does this, it's, I would say it's consuming, right? Before we hit record, I was like, you're on sabbatical, and you're like, yeah, I've made two features in the sabbatical. Where does this come
Yeah.
from?
My love of film began when I was a kid, and that began with the introduction of a VCR into my childhood home. My dad brought home a VCR in 1983, and it was one of those, the size of a Buick, sat up on top of your TV. It had a top. It was a top
Top
loader. I don't
loader.
know if you
Yep.
remember those. But yeah, that was. I started taping movies off of television and rewatching them over and over again, and to the point where like videotapes would disintegrate and I wouldn't be able to watch them anymore because they would literally turn to dust. I would play them so many times. I became an expert at repairing VHS tapes. I kind of think unless it is dust, there's no way I can't fix it. Um, and
So,
I,
what do you think about all this? Are you aware of the nostalgia for VHS these days?
yeah, yeah, I know that there are collectors. I suspect that they are more, they want to see the actual analog object in their hands and on their shelves than that they do want to see it on their television. At least that's where I am. I have a few VHS still that I sort of display on a bookcase, but just for fun in my office. But I'm not going to play them anytime soon.
Right.
They don't look very good. It's funny. There's a theater here in Portland where I live that is kind of like an Alamo Draft House. It does really innovative, interesting kind of community oriented programming and participatory programming. And one of the things they do is they do this B movie bingo night, and they show the movies on the big screen. And they have a massive. It's a historical theater that goes back to I think the 19 teens. Um, they have this massive screen, but they show the movies on VHS, and they actually roll the cart with the VCR out onto the stage in front of the screen, and then you see them put the tape in, and then it's like, it's tracking, and it's got glitches all over the place, and we sit there and watch it, and we love it. It's kind of a fun experience. So
Yeah.
there's a place somewhere for VHS still.
We actually had a Betamax player before we had a
Oh
VHS
wow,
machine,
yeah,
which was we were one of those families that adopted Beta, and then of course it didn't go anywhere, and we had to
yeah,
start over with VHS. But
yeah. I
the I
remember my dad was a pharmacist, and I grew up in a small town, and he was the first store that rented videotapes, and they rented both beta and VHS. And we had the machines too that we would rent out. They were like these big plastic machines complete with a handle on them, like a suitcase. And yeah, we had the beta machine and the VCR, and you could rent those for the night. And they were so heavy and so huge. I'm amazed that anyone ever bothered. But
I mean, surely having access to all those things because of your dad and those tapes being around was just like nonstop. You're feeding that passion, from a very young age. It was there. It was everywhere, right?
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Those the tapes that he had at his store were I watched so many times that they're like a part of me. They're ingrained. And some of them were terrible. And I have like incredible fondness for them, affection for them.
Hmm.
It was about 100 movies. It was a system where this is probably not that interesting, but there was a system for stores back in the day where you had vendors that would bring in tapes, and they would take out the tapes that weren't renting, and you it was sort of like the store rented the tapes as well instead of purchased them. This
Hmm.
is pre-video stores even, so we're talking like very early 80s. And that's the system that my dad's store had. This guy would come in like every 2 weeks with a big box of tapes, and he would see what was renting and what wasn't, and he would swap them out. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's the same way that worked with like paperback books, cassette tapes that they would sell, magazines. It was a very similar system. But there was a group of tapes that my wife laughs at me. She co-hosts the podcast with me, and I mention this all the time on our podcast. I call it the OG 100 because it was this sort of set of original 100 tapes that never left. And I don't know why the guy never took those, but the original group he brought always stayed there. And so those were the movies that became very important to me. And some of them are very like, nobody's ever heard of them.
Well, like what?
Oh, Max Dugan Returns was a movie that I really loved as a kid. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it. I don't know if I can remember what it is though.
Yeah, it's a wonderful Neil Simon comedy with Marsha Mason, who was his wife at the time, and it's Matthew Broderick's first movie. He plays her son, and um, she's a school teacher. They're mired in poverty, basically in Venice, California. And then one night, her dad, who's played by Jason Robards, shows up in the middle of the night with a suitcase full of millions of dollars and tells them that he is dying and that it is his dying wish to change their lives. And she doesn't want him to because he's a criminal and she suspects this money is stolen. And that proves to be correct. But he basically buys them like a new car and a new house, and he redecorates their place, and he brings in all these electronics, and he gets them a dog. And it's like a kid's dream to have this like mystery relative come out of nowhere and then shower you with riches and affection. And it's just a very, very funny and very charming movie. Donald Sutherland is in it. Kiefer Sutherland is in it. Yeah, I highly recommend it. That one actually holds up.
It's interesting though that as a kid, this is you're talking about Neil Simon stuff when you're just a kid. That's not something that I think. The reason I wanted to go down this avenue is because I observe that for people who are high achievers in the area of film, there's a moment or there's a path. There's like uh, a presence of cinema in their lives far beyond what it is in other people's lives. They connected to it on a visceral level, on a subconscious level, as something that just really fits for them. And I know that you're that way. And I wanted to find out, if there was a moment or if there was like a switch that flipped. And of course, you grew up with all this stuff around you and you were steeped in cinema. You probably don't remember a time without cinema.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I started begging my parents for a video camera when I was about 10. Um, and I probably got it. They got me one when I was about 14 and started making movies. It was one of those really heavy. Do you remember those ones that go on your shoulder? They were like 9 pounds, the
Yeah,
VHS recorder. Yeah.
those were expensive.
Yes, they were. And yeah, that's how, I mean, movies were sort of all I talked about. And, even as a kid, I was begging the video stores for their posters and their cardboard standees and putting those up in my bedroom.
Wow.
And I wish I still had a lot of that stuff. I
Yeah.
actually do. I still have a lot of the posters, but all the cardboard things are gone. But that was decor in my room.
Right.
And what I was starting to say about the VCR, the thing that the reason that device was so important to me was not just that you could watch things over and over again, but I started to realize as I would rewind something and play it over and then rewind it and play it again, that there was like a strategy for how these things were being made, it was my first sort of awakening to the idea that there were people behind this, behind the people on the screen, and that somebody had to be making these things. And I started to figure out sort of the language of editing and strategies of cinematography and art direction and film acting and stuff like that before I ever had a chance to sort of read about it in any kind of intellectual forum.